mute myself. Yeah.
We're somewhere in the 7th century.
Yes, so that's where 7th century Northwestern Europe. Okay. Let me just real quick do some more shameless self-promotion, as I did with the Center for Pre-Modern Studies podcast before, and it died. And I hate when that happens. Ugh, stop. So that's why I can't turn that around. Okay. But anyway, what that would have showed you was, oh, it's back up. So what that would have showed you was, I'll be teaching this class next semester. There we go. Military history of pre-modern Europe. So going from the tetrarchy, so the more political military sides of the tetrarchy and their reforms of the Roman military, all the way up to the French Revolution and Napoleon, the advent of modern war as sort of the capstone to this course. So we'll talk about a lot of things, but foremostly, the important thing to remember is that we'll be dealing with things other than cool technology, right? You know, people look at cool stuff like, oh, Lorica segmentata, the stirrup, right? The chariot, cruise missiles, Panzer Kampfwagens, all this sort of thing, as these cool things and cool technologies that then move warfare forward. When in fact, that's not true, right? As, Vladimir Putin has found out, logistics and morale are way more important, right? Way more important. Whether or not I have shoes on my feet and food in my belly is way more important than whether I have a cool tank that I'm driving. Because the tank will get left in the ditch and I will get the fuck out of there if I don't have the other things, right? It doesn't matter how cool the tank is. It doesn't matter how many missiles you have, right? If the logistics and the morale isn't there to back it up, right? Then it's not going to happen. So, and we'll explore that. We'll explore warriors and their relation with society, right? And how that engagement happens, right? Because for most of these times that we'll be considering in the late Roman army, it's a professional fighting force, right? And then as we move into the Middle Ages, you have, in the early Middle Ages, the levy of all the people, which will be sort of seen in the Helion, right? So it's a warrior society in mass. Am I? Oh yeah, I am recording, but it's just not sharing the screen. Sorry about the technical difficulties there. And then, of course, you have the rise of the knightly class, right? And looking at what that really means, right? In the context of the high Middle Ages and late Middle Ages, and then moving into modern warfare. Early modern warfare and the modern warfare up to the French Revolution. So the employment of gunpowder, it's less important than you think for most of the period because guns aren't rifled, cannons aren't as long range as they become by the late 18th century, when Napoleon then is able to use them as an actual arm of combat, right? But it is important still. But it's not necessarily a military revolution. We'll discuss what that means as a historiographical concept, right? And we'll also discuss here and there cool technologies, right? You cannot do a military history class without discussing technology in some sort of form. Although I will emphasize logistics, and the importance of morale, spirit de corps, believing, foremostly in the person to your left and right, whether they're worthy of fighting and dying with, and then, the higher ideal, like, oh, this king is worthy of fighting and dying for, this religion is worth fighting and dying for, right? But the first order, of course, is that inner uh, relation between the warriors, right? Between the soldier and the person to his left and his right, so or her right. All right. So that, in short, is that. So as soon as registration opens, if you are not, on your way to graduation, please give that class a consideration. I would really enjoy seeing most of you back in class. I'm joking. Any of you, right? So today, what I want to do is, for once, sit down, and then how am I going to do this if this thing doesn't want to? Oh, never mind. We're going to talk about these areas. If I could. Oh, I hate technology sometimes. Where's the mouse? Oh, it's there, and then it's there, then it's here. There we go. I did it. So, the northwestern European area. So the Saxons that the Heliond is written to in northwest Germany, and the Anglo-Saxon Jutes covered in Bede, right? And actually, what I want to do is sit down and go through these with you, especially with the Helion, sort of do some sort of textual archaeology. What does this text and the way it's written tell us about Saxon society, and what aspects make it a better way of reaching the Saxons, especially after their vicious conquest by Charlemagne, reaching them than like Wolfaloss did, just a simple translation, right? Which not translation is never simple, so I shouldn't say that. But instead of reconstructing the Gospels as this whole, saga, basically, just translating the Bible into Old High German. Right? Why was this? Why was this way chosen? Right? But first, let's do beat. Right. Now, I have to figure out, is there a way? So, I will be over here, so see if we can make this work. And my default speaker switched to something else. Okay, cool. All right, so first, why is the ecclesiastical history written? Right? What is Bede's purpose in writing this text? Is it still recording? I mean, I know my back is turned, but you can go ahead and answer. Yeah.
It's also a little bit like a defense of kind of the changes seen in Britain a little bit, and to prove that they were Orthodox, and to prove almost like that they were better than the Irish.
Yeah, that actually, I didn't even think of that, and that didn't come up in the previous class, but that's a really good one. So, with these differences, especially with the that one section we talked about in class the other day, where they're basically like just taking the idol out, blessing the temple, and turning it into a church, right? Yeah, you have to account for that because, as we talked about with, well, now they can't see the board, so well. Anyway, as we talked about with Patrick and his predecessor that we didn't mention, Palladius, right, who was actually the first apostle, right? They came from Rome. They had permission from Leo, who was Pope at the time, right, to go to Ireland and preach there, right? But what else was happening in the 5th century that we've talked about? What movement, right?
The fall of the Romans.
that was happening, but what else? Like a more ecclesiastically, religiously related movement. Yeah.
Islamic Empire.
No, that's 100 years later. What's up?
Nestorians?
Nestorians, yes, but different. Yeah,
Celtic Irish Christianity.
that's what they create inadvertently. But what?
Arianism? Yeah.
No. Okay, maybe I should have said going back into the 4th and 3rd century. What movement did we spend a lot of time talking? Bam! There we go. So at the time they come to Ireland, this is the height of the ascetic movement, and so that is preserved in Irish Christianity, right? Whereas by the time the embassy of Augustine is coming from Rome at the time of Pope Gregory, as we saw, sort of the beginnings of it with Saint Benedict, right? Right? It's a different type of monasticism, much more rigid, much more organized, right? And institutionalized within the infrastructure of a monastery, right? Whereas Irish monastics, as we've seen, right, they go out to some, point in the wilderness, some rock in the ocean, somewhere deep in the forest of Germany, and they're like, hey, this is where I'm going to worship God and build my monastery, right, on this desolate, place, right? So it's very much that older style of monasticism that we talked about, right? Sort of anchoritic and the earlier types of cenobitic, where these guys are going out into the desert. So it's no longer the actual desert because there are no deserts in Northwestern Europe, but it's that same concept. I'm going to go out on this rock, struggle with demons, right? And get closer to God, right? And maybe write some nice manuscripts, some cool fonts, you know. So it is definitely a meeting of two worlds, right? Sort of Irish Christianity has sort of preserved that older type of Christian practice and monasticism, and the newer type developed by the Roman Church is brought forward by people like Augustine, right? Let's see. And what was the point of saying all that? I think the point was the meeting of the two, right? Irish Christianity, and this being sort of an apologia for the English Church, right? What else? What else stands out about Bede and his writing? And briefly consider, other similar, historically minded texts we've read, right? So the accounts of the Desert Fathers, the life of Constantine, accounts of the Eastern Church, right? What stands out on its own and also in relation to some of those earlier ones we read?
He doesn't talk about the faults of the saints that he writes about. He doesn't talk about their humanity. He just kind of praises them.
Right. So they're sort of these objects of divine will in history, right? Instead of being more human, as we saw in some accounts.
Yeah, one thing that I noticed, and I don't know if it's because a chapter was left out or something, but I remember in the book it said their first approach was to do the typical, let's argue against it and, burn some altars down.
Right.
And I don't know if that was left out in the readings we did, but I didn't see any of that.
Yeah, I think that got left out of the excerpt. So there was a consideration of going that more traditional idol smashing disputation method that we've talked about in the last few weeks. But right, the critical thing is that they don't, right? And specifically that, and as Bede, as a good historian, documents this, right? He's like, this is a letter from Gregory that says this, right? Once again, as proof, right? So he's doing his due diligence, right? Quoting the sources. So, this is a way of accessing. So, first they get the permission of the king, right? They get set up in Canterbury. right? But then this is a way of accessing, right? Who?
People?
The people, or as we talked about last week, what could we call them? No, but the term I talked about. Yes, exactly. Simple believers. Right? And so by keeping these points of divine power, right, which these temples are, right, and they're this area of, at this point, almost 2 centuries of cultic practice, and probably even go further back that probably were used by the Britons, earlier during Roman times and Iron Age times, right? Some of these places. Like there's evidence of like Stonehenge being used in these contexts, right? So these are naturally places that have accrued a perception of not only ritual tradition, but divine power. So instead of coming and smashing them up like the Egyptian monks do in the late 300s, right? Or carving big crosses into them, right? What they instead do is like, hey, take out the idol, sprinkle some holy water, right? And that'll get rid of the demonic presence, and then you can worship the true God here. But to Edgar Peasant, right? He's gonna be like, well, I don't know about these Christian guys. They took over my temple and whatnot, but I mean, the temple's still there. I can still go there every Sunday, see what this whole Jesus thing is about. Maybe it's not such a bad deal, right? Whereas, right, in the period of the Helion, right, when we fast forward 300 years, so this is taking place, of course, in the 7th century, right? Right? The conversion was, late 6th century, right? So Augustine of Canterbury. And then we fast forward to the end of the 8th century, right? With Charlemagne's conquest of Saxony, which is completely different. So let me give you some numbers briefly. So at one occasion, because of their refusal to convert the Saxon nobility, Charlemagne kills 4,000 nobles, right? Beheads them. Right? Another 10,000 people in another account are deported to France, right? To fill in areas that are agricultural areas that are depopulated. So they're deported to northern France. Right? And these are the actual numbers we can get from the accounts. There's a lot more, killing and yearly campaigns that lead up to the point at which, interestingly enough, in the year 800, you can consider the Saxons subdued. And that is the same year. What happens on Christmas Day that year? Anyone know?
Crowned emperor.
Crowned Roman emperor by the hands of the Pope himself, right? In St. Peter's, right? So this is a big year for Charlemagne, the quote unquote father of Europe, right? But to get there, he's had to wade through a sea of blood, right? And one of these monks trained in this English tradition, right, is his chief advisor, Alcuin of York. I think we had a few quotes from him in the class, did we? Definitely during the lecture, there was some quotes from Alcuin of York, the lecture the other day. Yesterday. So not Dr. Sturt's lecture, the extra lecture she put out. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So Alcuin's like, well, actually, we have the example of Gregory and all these people that didn't, go around killing, killing and burning stuff. My Lord King, if you could, right, convert them just by, showing the benefits of being a Christian, right, without destroying everything. Charlemagne doesn't listen to us. So it's definitely a program in which he goes in, he basically decapitates not only the nobility, but the Saxon religion, in which is very much, you're at all familiar with Germanic or Norse mythology, right? It's very much of that Odin and all this sort of stuff, right? So it's very much that traditional Germanic religion. He cuts all of that off by force, right? and replaces the Saxon nobility with Frankish ones, right? And so, in a way, you could see the Helion just sort of trying to repair that breach that naturally gets made. But we'll get back to that in a second. Are there any other things that stood out from Bede's account before we get to the Helion? All right. Uh, very paranoid about this. Is it?
Interesting that the missionaries were at the beginning against trying to go to England.
Oh yeah. Well, they said why, right? This is this barbarous place. We don't even speak the language. And it's like, why would I go to the Indo? These are guys coming from Rome, which even in its denuded medieval state, right, it was probably down to like 30,000 people at this point instead of the 1.5 million it held during, where we started during the beginning of class, right, where it really was the center of the world, right. So now it's 30,000 people, but you still have all these cool old buildings. The Pope is there. All these nobles are there. All these intellectuals are there. People are translating stuff still from Greek. In some places, there's like a Greek monastery there that does those translations, right? This is still a center of culture, even though it's no longer the heart of the empire, right? And instead, you're going to this cold, rainy Ireland. Cold, rainy Ireland. Cold, rainy island, right? To talk to these strange people and try to hopefully convert them, but you could be martyred, right? They could have easily ended up like other people we've talked about this semester did, right? On the short end of the spear, right? So let's see. There we go. Okay, it is still recording. Is oh. Okay. I hope it can hear. How have the videos been, by the way? Anybody that has actually used the videos? Grade A. All right, that's good. Good to know. So it's worthwhile doing this, especially if people are not able to attend for health reasons or whatnot. It's, giving them that opportunity to still be on pace. Yeah. Okay, so did that. Let's see. Anything else about B before we move on to the Helion?
Letters Gregory sent to
Yeah.
the missionaries
Mhm.
in both order to motivate them and also like to tell them what to do in a way.
Right. And though Bede, right? This is the great thing about Bede. Now, obviously this is as it says in the title, ecclesiastical history. So it's a history of the expansion of the church in the British Isles, mainly. It's also a moral example. So people who do good, especially kings who do good, prosper, right? Same theme we've seen carry over from Life of Constantine and whatnot, right? And even the evil ones are an example, right? Because then you see, like in Lactantius's death of the persecutors, right? Well, God punishes them in some way, right? So that's even more an injunction to do good and be a good Christian, right? So those are the big, writ large purposes. But, Bede, who is one of these monks himself, in one of these, I think Yarrow was founded by English monks, but that had originally been trained by Irish monks. We talked about that. Yeah, Monday. So he is doing correct historical practice, even though this is, ecclesiastical history. It's about miracles and all this cool religious stuff. He's documenting this stuff, right? As part of that apologia, right? This is why the English church is the way it is. And here's proof that this is approved of from Rome. This is a letter from Gregory at this date, at this time, telling the monks to go and do this, right?
Yeah.
So he's showing the receipts. He's providing proper historical evidence, right? And integrating those in a way that fits with the narrative, right? So take some notes from him, great scholar, right? This is great historical practice. Right? So, was there anything else? I think Josh, you had here.
The again the letters from Gregory were really interesting simply from the fact that he seemed very sympathetic to the British peoples, and especially the the dispute of Easter and the time thereof. With I found it quite humorous that he referred to, or someone referred to the Scots as the stubborn people going against the entirety of the rest of the Catholic world.
Right.
And it's like, well, you just described Scots.
Yeah.
That's their entire culture.
Yeah, that's
Um,
an ancient attribute.
Yeah.
So, and here's the thing with the dispute over Easter. This seems like a minor thing, but this actually was big in the early church. We didn't really touch on it because bigger stuff like the concept of Christ, the Godhead, and whatnot. But differences in dating, right? And earlier in the church, it was like basically who was closer to the date, the Hebraic dating of like Passover, right? And churches that were going by a different computation. So Rome developed its own computation. Churches in Asia Minor had their own computation. Gaul developed their own computation. And basically, one of the things that gets sorted out in some of these synods and councils is that dating of Easter for the majority of the church. Now, once again, because the British Isles are sort of cut off in this period of endemic warfare and dislocation in the Western Empire in the 5th and 6th century, right? They sort of keep that older way of noting it, whereas the Roman Church has moved to a different system, right? So, yeah, that is the long and short of it on the Easter thing. But why is that important, right? Yeah.
Well, it is the Catholic Church, the universal church. If everyone is not holding the same feasts and traditions, then it is not truly universal.
Okay, but riddle me this, right? They even say in the synods, right? Well, we're not saying these guys are evil. We're not saying these guys are not holy men that taught you this, but we just want you to change its incorrect practice and we want it to be united, right? United faith. But I mean, if it's still holy men, then it's still. I mean, what is the significance, right? Like, what? Okay, not. Let me hear from somebody different. What does this do? What kind of marker is this? Yes.
Well, beyond just like a marker of like this unity, it's a marker that like the church doesn't really know.
Oh, so this.
So you can't claim to be an authority to have like a message of God.
Yeah, so this sort of undermines the authority they're trying to build, right? Because if there's a dispute between the churches, between the Irish, the Scots and the English over what the date of Easter is, then Edgar Peasant is going to be like, I don't know, I don't know about this. I'm going to keep worshiping Odin in my barn. Nobody has to know, but yeah.
Another council might see.
So it's another, so this sort of ecumenical sort of, well, in this case, it's just this regional synod, but sort of resolving of things. Now, Josh, what do you got?
It's also important to note that they established the supremacy of Peter as the rock and the holder of the keys of heaven. So that's also something to point out as well.
There you go. Yeah. So Peterine supremacy early on, which, as we talked about in class, sort of dates from the time of Damascus. Yeah, there we go. And Leo the Great, right? But now is pretty much solidified, at least theologically. Political implications of Peterine supremacy we'll talk about during the High Middle Ages. Those aren't realized yet. Be very excited when we get to all the Gregories and Innocents in the 11th and 12th century that tried to make the Pope the monarch of Europe, but we're not there yet. So
that would be cool.
Leaving that aside, let's move on quickly to the Heliod, right? So, what is this text doing, right? And I want to dig into this as a way of looking both at what it's doing with the Gospels and what it tells us about Saxon society. Now, I gave you a brief sketch of what happened to the Saxons, sort of the the sort of trauma of conquest. But I didn't tell you anything about, the society. So it's going to be your job as young scholars to use this text, right? Its purpose is to evangelize, but we're going to use it to also say something about what the Saxons value, what is important to them, and how why this is a better way to engage with Christ than just a translation of the gospel. Yes.
I'm curious how much this would have been a sort of an interpretation of how Christianity had grown in Germany, how people were already perceiving Jesus and the Gospels.
Right, because those English and Irish monks have been coming there since the late 7th century, right? So maybe there was already these sorts of traditions trans transforming the gospel that were developed by these earlier monks. You're saying,
Yeah, like it's a long story. I mean, how much did they really come up with this?
right? Just out of whole cloth, or even playing off the Tesseract.
Going to changing that up a little bit, going towards the society portion. If you look at the language of the book, or the language of the book, and they're talking about hill forts rather than cities. They're talking about chieftains rather than kings and emperors. It reads very much as a local sort of text rather than a national one.
Bam! Exactly. So they're mapping Saxon geography and society onto the first century onto the first century Mediterranean, right? So Hill Fort Rome, Hill Fort Jerusalem. The chief Jesus talks to his heroic followers, his hero companions in the mountain, right? So they're taking this world, right? The Saxons did not have, unlike the other barbarian groups we've talked about, did not have a monarchy. Okay, this is going to be your last one, and then I gotta leave you out. So pick wisely. Do you want to answer now, or you want to answer later?
Well, it's really okay. I'll answer now. But you look at Beowulf. It reads a lot. It reads very similarly.
All right.
Because like you look at if anybody here's read it, I don't know, but you look at how they talk about Beowulf and his companions. It reads the exact same way.
Exactly. Good one. Yeah. So,
are you talking about the same way Wolf gets naked?
Well, elaborate on that a little bit. Yeah, the fight with Grendel and yes. Okay. Because people getting naked is an ancient thing, so I don't know. That's not specific enough. So they're mapping what we know as this very urbanized, very interconnected world of the first century Mediterranean, and instead, putting it in the terms of Northwest German life, right? What else can we tell about the society, right? So definitely, it's this sort of regional, localized society, and hierarchical with the chiefdoms. What else?
Yeah, well, I was gonna dwell more into the hierarchical aspect, more specifically how they sort of value like a strong, like warrior leader.
Exactly.
That's very important because sort of the message of the gospel is more so that Jesus has come onto earth to be like a sacrificial lamb, which is very different to like what their expectations are.
Exactly. Yeah. Because this society is based around, right, these leaders, right? So the Saxons, like I said, did not have an established monarchy. They would elect one of their chieftains in times of crisis, like when one of the times Charlemagne invades, they elect a guy called Witekund, right? And he leads the war effort. But these are temporary figures. Most of it is based on the chief, right? And then his select followers, right? And these guys all live, so very much, Beowulf mode. They all live in a hall, right? And part of the thing, right? And this sort of comes up, and this came up in last class, right? Is These guys are all dependent on this guy's largesse and his ability to be strong, to win in battle, right? To rule, right? Because they're literally companions, right? They break bread with him, right? And they're dependent on him for their wealth, for their food, and for the keeping the type of lifestyle. So this hard drinking, partying lifestyle in these great halls, right? Like they, did with the wedding of Cana, right? This is integral because you're able to enjoy the benefits and party with your comrades, right? After all of your labors, right? So this is very much part of this lifestyle and conspicuous consumption, right? Considering how poor this part of the world is in comparison to Iraq, Persia, any of the other places we've looked at this semester. This is a very poor part of the world, right? We're still talking about building these big monasteries out of wattle and daub, right? So out of basically sticks and mud and dung, right? So anyone that can gather any amount of money, right, uh, is a strong person, a big person, important person, right? And not only does this show that material strength, but also probably spiritual power. Because in order to triumph in battle, you have to be backed by the gods or God, right? So who is the strongest possible chieftain of them all? Who's the greatest that gives the most rewards? Jesus, right? So you translate this, this way society is organized, and that would speak to this highly hierarchical and militarized society. And you translate instead of talking about God who so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son, all this, soft sort of stuff. No disrespect, right? But but and you transfer it into this martial idiom, right? It immediately becomes more ascertainable. Just the same as with the sutras of Jesus the Savior, right? Christianity, the New Testament story is transferred into this Buddhist context and immediately becomes more attainable for Chinese simple believers, and just the same with Saxon simple believers here, right? By putting it in this heroic society mode. Right now, what else can we tell about Saxon society and what's important to them?
I thought that there's like the song where they're talking about like the importance of like charity, and I thought that it was interesting that they emphasize with like every paragraph, when you donate to charity, don't brag about it to everybody, like constantly emphasizing humility, and it feels like that's like an important part of Saxon society is like boasting your accomplishments, when this one is saying don't do that, just keep it to yourself.
Exactly, because this is once again part of this, conspicuous consumption. Because usually these guys are gathered around, they're drinking, and also there'd be, right, which is where these stories come from, like Beowulf, right? A bard, right, who's singing songs usually about the chief guy there, like, oh, you did this great thing in battle, that's great, and you cut off this guy's head, and you took all this money, and this is like great stuff, right? And they're all able to sit around and enjoy this as entertainment, but it's also memory, and it's also inculcating, this idea of society and passing it on to the next generation, right? That's why these are, stories are preserved to this day, right? Even though this was a society on the edge of literacy, right? So yeah, boasting, showing the stuff on the outside, the part where they have baby Jesus, already wrapped up in bling, right? Like not New Testament. He was in the stable with the camels and stuff. There was no bling yet, right? The three wise men hadn't come. So, but this is showing this is the Son of God. He's important. He's cool right out of the womb of Mary, right? So this is how you know he's important, right? And once again, that wealth disparity, right? If you're walking around in Baghdad with jewels on, right? I mean, people might notice, but there are a lot of people with jewels and fancy furs and silks on, right? This is one of the great cities of the world. Now, if you're walking around in the middle of Saxony or in London with gold and jewels on, it's going to be hella more noticeable, right? And they're like, oh, that's a very important person. Like I want to get to know them, or I want to rob them. Either one, right? One of those will happen, right? So this is way more of a marker, right? And part of that society and part of that showing and telling who you are is that boasting. So these whoever this author is and these monks have to actively come in and inculcate this idea. Because once again, there's not this tradition either Christian humility or as we talked about earlier, these ideas from Stoicism and Neoplatonism that would also lend themselves to humility, decorum, like you don't boast, right? You just let it be known who you are, and by your acts you shall be known. By your fruits you shall be known, not by boasting and having bards sing songs about you.
So we know that like monastic life kind of grew from the Brit English missionaries. How did that work out in that society?
So it's a slow change over time. By the time you get to somebody like Alfred the Great, right? How many of you have watched either Vikings or Last King? All right, good amount. So, but while not the most historically accurate shows, they do show this changeover, right? So by the time you get down to the 8th and 9th century, right, these guys, because of that intense missionary work, have inculcated, especially Alfred, right? Every little stomach ache, he was like, "Oh, God is punishing me. Please help me. I've sinned." Right? Very heavy into penitence, very heavy into humility. Even though he was obviously a very ambitious ruler of what was to become, England in the next century under his grandson. So by that time, it's inculcated, but it's a process, right? And there's still, sort of elements of that previous journey. That's why things like Beowulf get preserved, right? Of wanting to have that memory of this proud, boastful warrior society. But by the time we get to the 9th century, so when the Helion is being written in Old Saxony, the other Saxons are like, okay, the process has taken hold. They are, part of the same penitent tradition as the rest of the Catholic West. So, good question. Let's see, what else? What else stands out as we hurtle towards the end of times? Well, the end of class. Yeah,
They keep Jesus' descent from David and ancient kings.
right. And of course, this is important because this is very focused on that hierarchy, right? So this is something you want to carry over, not the gentle lovey-dovey stuff, but this ancient line of kings that ruled over the Israelites. Many, it's not really many thousands of years ago, but that's immediately a claim to legitimacy, right? And that would make sense to the society, right? Same reason the Gospels themselves, emphasize it as well, right? But to a greater extent here, right? What else? Yes.
I thought a lot of the use of God's message and sort of its interpretation as bringing power to its adherents is kind of used to serve the Druidic tradition.
Right. They even call it a spell, right? With God creating the world and with Jesus being born, they refer specifically to God's words in these acts as spells, as runes, right? So this is, specifically going against an idea that these things in the hands of not Druids, because that's a Celtic version, but in these, figures, right, has power. Like actually this power comes from God, right? And so putting it in that context immediately makes it make sense, right? It's not this more philosophical thing that we've been talking about with the various interpretations, like, well, the logos moved and did this and that. Like, no, like, hey, God spoke some stuff and bam, the world. There you go. That's what you need to know, right? This looks like power and magic in the mind of these ancient people in Germany and Scandinavia, right? It's something that they would have dealt with, just like we talked about with the lead tablets and ancient magic in the Mediterranean. Same sort of deal, right? And so putting God's power in that context immediately makes it make sense. Right? I see. Oh, couple more things. Anything else?
I'm curious that eventually Christianity took over Britain. So I wonder if there will be a new religion that will take over Christianity.
Oh, that's too deep a question for this class. We gotta go with something lighter.
Sorry.
That's a. I mean, it's hard to say, right? Because there have been different denominations, of course, of Christianity that have developed over the last 1,500 years, right? Uh, who could say? That's a good. I don't know. That's we'll come back to that at the end of the semester, probably. Like,
I
that's.
mean, I think
Oh my God. Yes, yes.
gates of
Rome,
hell
the throne
shall
of
never
Peter.
prevail
Yeah.
against the kingdom of heaven.
Yes. Okay. That's good. We haven't gotten to Revelation. That's it. Yes.
I just like I think the biggest thing that I took from reading two different like the history and the is just the different approaches towards Christianization, and how like I kind of read the Hellion as almost like PR move. Like you've taken over and we've converted all of you. Now, like let's convince you that you like it.
Right. And make it like culturally, especially just with these two sets of numbers alone, the amount of people killed, the amount of people taken away. Right. Would this be enough to repair that? Right. Even though you're putting it in the cultural context of the Saxons, right? You've had a whole generation of people wiped out, right? Like, would this be enough of a PR move to make up for that? Yeah.
Yeah, adding on to that, there's a passage in it that says like, with greater fullness for the people that you are to love your enemies and your feelings just as you love your family's relatives in God's name.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like to me that kind of comes off as so guys, just don't, love us. Don't kill us. Don't hate us.
Right.
Kind of a thing.
Yeah, exactly. So, hey, you have to acknowledge the Franks and love them as your neighbors as you would yourself, right? Yeah.
I think it may have been I think it's a fairly acceptable PR move, just because a couple hundred years ago. I mean, how unusual is it on a local level?
Mercs like this. Yeah. That is true. The Romans did it all the time. The Saxons when they went to England, right? Although that's sort of disputed whether it was peaceful settlement or whether they came killed and cleared the land to create the seven kingdoms that we see in Bede, right? But
did to each other too.
right. So violence is sort of endemic in the pre-modern world, right? Hey, I don't like that you have all these chickens. I could go to court, but there might not be a court. So me and my buddies from my meat hall are going to go over to your meat hall, burn it down, take your chickens. Problem solved, right? Which is fine until it turns into a blood feud, right? And then my grandson is killing your grandson. And, yeah.
Quick question.
Yeah.
What happens if the grandson kills the other grandson, but that's the last grandson that they actually had?
Right. Then that's fatality, right? And then you get to write a song. You get to write a song about how great my family is. We wiped out this entire other family, right? And this is not just in Northwestern Europe. This is a lot of great songs in the Arabian tradition, both in the pre-Islamic age and after, are about these same types of blood feuds, right? So this is a phenomenon across Eurasia in these societies, right? That are less, in the old style they would say primitive, but that's very inaccurate, right? Even though materially, yes, they have less than somewhere like Baghdad or India or Cairo, right? These are still very sophisticated societies, and especially one in which you could produce something like the Hellion, right? Sort of transferring, all of this history of Christianity into this society's idiom. That takes a lot, right? That takes an intellect to be able to think through these things. So we're dealing with people that are different, maybe materially less poor, but still, the way they deal with things is just as important as all the cool Mediterranean people we've met, over the semester. So I'll leave you with that. Have a good weekend. We'll have the exams back by Monday in total, so you can see your grade.
I don't know if I need that.
No.
With it being a PR move, it's like handing someone like a get well soon card. Yeah, sorry I killed your entire family.
Yeah.
You're-
It's amazing, right? But the crazy thing is, by the end of the 9th century, right, there is another known as the Saxon poet, right?
yeah.
He writes a poem saying, well, it's good that Charlemagne came and killed all these people because otherwise we wouldn't be Christians. So in a way, the PR works, right? That by 890 somebody is writing this legitimately and saying, hey, thank God for Charlemagne. He was the apostle that led us to Christianity, even though it took all that genocide, basically, right? Yeah.
So when we're writing our psych paper for this week, do you want us to select the B text? Do you want us to write about what the history is and the context of the history, or what that tells us about the author and his perspective on it?
I prefer dealing with the author and what he's talking about in the text than trying to do Anglo-Saxon history.
Okay,
We're
so
not
we're focusing on what he's saying and make a thesis about him, his telling of the history.
Right, or what you see in the text about the development of Christianity.
Okay, so you can do either or,
right.
The author or the history itself.
Right.
Okay. So
yeah.
And then can I email you maybe a thesis that I've made?
Always.
Okay,
yeah.
perfect.
Yeah. So definitely get that out there.
Yeah.
As soon as possible.
Yeah.
And I'll look it over and tell you yay or nay.
All right, perfect.
Yeah.
So I definitely went much more theological, analyzing syncretism.
Right.
Is that okay?
That's fine. Yeah. So as long as you're supporting it from the text, that's great. So good to go.
Yeah, I made quotes and referenced the text.
Right.
Especially the ecclesiastical history. I focused on that one most. I don't think I even mentioned hell yet.
That's fine. That's fine. I prefer it if you focus on one text, and that way.
I kind of figured.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that works. So who here? So Maya definitely. Daniel, you already took the test. If you have questions, I can answer those right now, and then I need the people who are taking the exam.
Oh, yeah, I did that.
Okay.
I did it on the day.
Okay. So did you have a question?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay.
I think we
Right on. I appreciate that. My pearls of wisdom.
I probably would do the exact same. I don't think I.
Just about the lecture yesterday to write extra credit. Do we just write you, Dr. Sir, an email about it?
Yeah. Preferably put in a Word doc, email it to me, and you'll be good to go. And so that'll count towards your participation grade. All right. So we're going to go over to, let's see, stop. Because